Solgaleo is finally coming to Pokemon Go as part of the Astral Eclipse event in Pokemon Go. Basically, starting on November 23rd, we will finally be able to evolve our Cosmoems into Solgaleo or Lunala based on the time of day. Of course, we only got one Cosmoem, so are we going to evolve into Solgaleo or Lunala? Well, in this video series, I'm going to help you fully understand the current and future potentials of both Solgaleo and Lunala, so you can, come to your own conclusion as far as which one will be better for your account to evolve. In this specific video, I'm going to be focusing on Solgaleo here. Starting out with the basics here, Solgaleo is a Psychic Steel dual-type Pokemon with a maximum CP at level 40 of 4,035, at level 50, 4,562. It's got a base attack stat of 255, which is pretty respectable, but I will remind you that our Meteor Mash friend Metagross has a base attack stat of 257, so for a Steel-type raid attacker, the deck is already slightly stacked against it. When it comes to its move pool, which either makes or breaks a Pokemon, we don't have a Steel-type fast move. Instead, we have Zen Headbutt and Fire Spin. I think Fire Spin is pretty interesting on this Steel Psychic Pokemon, especially when it comes to PvP, because it gives it kind of like a dynamic role there. But Zen Headbutt is just kind of bad all over the place, which means this Pokemon as a Psychic type attacker and a Steel type attacker for raids is a little bit dead on arrival. And if you check out Solgaleo's full learn set here on smogin.com, you can see that there are no other viable fast moves that are Psychic type attacks either, so I guess Zen Headbutt is the best they can do. If Zen Headbutt is the best they can do, I humbly request that they get rid of it and give Solgaleo Metal Claw or something instead, because Zen Headbutt's just sad. Then looking at the charge moves, we got Iron Head, Psychic Fangs, which is pretty interesting for PvP, giving it a unique debuffer role, Solar Beam, which it's just kind of awkward typically, but I guess it is like a sun Pokemon, so a beam of sun makes sense thematically. And then we got Flamethrower, which is all around kind of mid. So just how good is this Pokemon in raids? Well, let's talk about its future potential in raids, because it could get buffed in different ways. It has a signature attack, Sunsteel Strike. It could get Metal Claw, right? Right now, though, not looking so hot, but the future potential. Pulling up the DPS TDO spreadsheet here on GamePress, you can see that Solgaleo with Metal Claw, with a signature attack, Sunsteel Strike, copying the stats of Shadow Force in raids, would be better than the Meteor Mash Metagross. It would still be behind in performance compared to the Shadow Metagross. Not even Mega Metagross or Zacian Crowned form is better than the Shadow Metagross, so clearly that's not a feat that is easily accomplished here for our 255 base attack stat Pokemon, right? But for the non-Shadow side of the Force, I think this is a pretty impressive showing for Solgaleo if Sunsteel Strike ends up being at least as good as Shadow Force. If you're curious what a Metal Claw Iron Head Solgaleo would look like, its performance is roughly on the level of Dialga. I think Dialga has a slightly higher attack stat, but it's ever so slight, so I'd say it's performing roughly on this level. So overall, won't be a breakout Steel type attacker either way you slice it, before it gets its signature attack, of course, but does have some interesting potential there. Then simming out Solgaleo here as a Fire type attacker, because it does have them Fire type attacks. You can see it's not making page 1 here. It is not making page 2 here. But it is making page 3 down here at the bottom with Overheat. Yeah, because Flamethrower is such a bad attack, it wasn't appearing until page 5 or so. So I was like, well, how would it look with the better Fire type moveset using Overheat instead of Flamethrower? And it's still pretty mediocre. I'd say overall, you'd probably just stick with your level 30 budget, Blast Burn, Charizards, Typhlosions, Blazikins, Emboars, your Chandelures, before you'd really want to dip in deep to the Solgaleo here. I just thought it'd be interesting to look into because, non-Fire type Pokemon, Fire type moveset, but yeah, it doesn't look too good. So I'd say when it comes to the raid side of the Force, we only have future potential for Solgaleo, and that's with a good Sunsteel Strike. So overall, not looking that great. But where you fail in raids. You could be better in PvP. And Solgaleo is looking pretty interesting, at least, for both the Ultra League and Master League PvP metas. Taking a peek at Solgaleo in the Ultra League meta, it comes in at a pretty respectable 3,700-ish stat product, and the Fire Spin, Psychic Fang, Iron Head moveset is a little bit awkward, but I think it has a pretty unique role here. If you look at the 1-1 shield scenario against rank 1 opponents exclusively, it doesn't look that impressive. We only got 9 wins and 30 losses, right? But it's not about how many wins you have, it's what you're winning and how you're winning it, right? And I think you can see that Solgaleo has cemented itself pretty well into like an anti-fairy, anti-poison type kind of role, which a lot of steel type Pokemon find themselves in. One thing that sets it apart though is that it's got really good Escavalier and Venusaur matchups. It can handle some fighting types pretty well too, such as Gramble and Buzzwole, and then IV dependent, it can also manage some of the Machamps fairly well on top of it. So I think it's got a pretty interesting, unique place. I don't think it's a terrible Pokemon. I think it's good enough in the Ultra League where like YouTubers and streamers and Solgaleo enthusiasts can use it and get wins and promote their wins and stuff like that. But I don't think overall it's going to be a very consistent Pokemon, because compared to other steel type Pokemon or, you know, anti-fairy, anti-poison type Pokemon, I think the other options have a lot more going on. For example, Solgaleo just kind of folds completely to the Giratinas, doesn't really have anything to do there. Doesn't do hot at all against the dark type Pokemon that also dominate the meta because of the Giratinas. Doesn't do well against the opposing steel type Pokemon despite having the fire type fast move. It doesn't have the charge move pressure it needs. Even with Flamethrower, it's still lacking that charge move pressure. So yeah, overall definitely not your first pick, but definitely not the worst pick out there, and a little bit better than what these base simulations will suggest. But overall, definitely could use a little bit of a move pool upgrade to really shine. When it comes to the Master League meta, Solgaleo has more of a direct comparison to a Pokemon in Metagross. Metagross being a Steel-type Pokemon, both Solgaleo and Metagross having this anti-fairy, anti-Zacian kind of role going on. And then both of these Pokemon don't really have a whole lot going on outside of that, you know, one kind of trapper role that they have going on here. So I think there is a easy direct comparison between the two. Very similar, they got the same exact typing going on, but also very different because their movesets are also wildly different, right? Now if you look at the even shield scenarios, you'll notice that in the 1-1 and the 0-0, Metagross is going to be outperforming Solgaleo, and that's because Metagross has the better attacks. It's got the big Earthquake, it's got the big Meteor Mash, Solgaleo's got the big Nothing, and is also quite slow with Fire Spin, Psychic Fangs, and either Iron Head or Flamethrower. Where Solgaleo is going to shine is going to be in like the 2 shield situations, where it can capitalize on its bigger bulk and its debuffing role a little bit more compared to Metagross. You could chalk up some of these wins to being sim hero wins, where a real human wouldn't shield the same way against Solgaleo as this computer is, but the computer is relatively comprehensive when it comes to that. I think a lot of these wins are kind of based off the fact that it does have the higher stat product and it has the debuff chance going on with it. Debuff chances in your opponent having the chance to shield the Psychic Fangs, right? And then another area where Solgaleo will stand out will be when at a shield disadvantage. Once again, it having bigger bulk than the Metagross there, allowing it to outbulk some matchups that it's relatively good in without getting overwhelmed, where like Togekiss, for example, could take out Metagross with the Flamethrower. Doesn't exactly happen against the Solgaleo here because Solgaleo will be bulky enough to withstand that and then finish out the KO. Similar kind of thing with the Zacians and withstanding the close combats. So I think overall Solgaleo does have some interesting potential in the Master League. Definitely not the #1 ace in the hole Master League Pokemon on the block here. It is comparable to Metagross, which isn't really saying a lot, but it is also a good spot to be in at the same time in a Zacian dominated meta. If it were to get a move pool update, a little bit of an upgrade going on, I think if it were to get a better auxiliary attack than Flamethrower or Iron Head, such as Crunch, for example, I think that could help it out, make it a little bit less awkward against you know, Ghost and Psychic type Pokemon. Another room for improvement for Solgaleo too would be in giving it Flame Charge. That way it could kind of double down on its trapper hard counter kind of role, and then rather than having an outright nuke attack to pair with it, it could just ramp up its own damage by using the flame charge against them. I think that would be a pretty unique thing for Solgaleo. Then coming out of its dominant matchups, it could either debuff the next thing in even more with a flame charge boosted Psychic Fangs, or it could just start ramming its boosted Iron Head into neutral matchups as well. So either of those small upgrades to Solgaleo would kind of take it from being this awkward, mediocre pick in the Master League, like it's spicy, you could use it, but just use Metagross, man, and would make it more defined in its role where it's like, hey, it's the Metagross that ramps up damage, right? So I think that would be pretty interesting. But overall, even without the adjustments, Solgaleo is looking like a spicy, interesting pick for the Master League, but definitely not a must-have by any stretch. So overall rating for Solgaleo, I think it's pretty interesting for its future potential in raids, possibly being a interesting spicy steel type Pokemon, but without having Metal Claw, it is kind of hard to imagine it actually getting there, as it needs two things to change to be good, rather than just getting its signature attack. Then when it comes to the PvP side of the force, it does have an interesting role in both the Ultra League and the Master League. Unfortunately, it's not all that great at its interesting role, right? When it comes to the Master League, I think that's probably where it's going to be the strongest, being kind of a spice comparison to the Metagross. I think that if it had a little bit more going on in its charge move damage, or if it had Flame Charge to kind of ramp itself up in its dominant matchups, I think it could stand out a little bit more in the Master League. But as it stands, it seems like Solgaleo is mostly going to be here for the Solgaleo enthusiasts and not so much the average everyday player. So yeah, next up, we're going to talk about Lunala, the Batman twin to the Solgaleo here. Could it be a lot better? Well, to just kind of temper some expectations, it is interesting. Arguably a little bit more interesting than Solgaleo, but it's not all that much better, right? So which one will you choose to evolve your Cosmoem into? That is the question. Now, if you got any questions on this content, of course, comment below, let me know what's up, and I'll be happy to help you out. And if you enjoyed this kind of content, you want to see more like it, well, make sure to subscribe to SwagTips. SwagTips. I'd also like to give a special shout out to these Patreon supporters. If you want to support Swagman on Patreon, link in the description.